We are up for a new session here. So we have joining us wonderful Burke and Allison. Allison is a solutions engineer at Hasura. Welcome, Allison. And Burke is cloud developer advocate here at Microsoft. Burke and I used to be on the same team. We're still in the same team, but larger team. I'm going to share a few interesting facts here. One about Allison, I love chocolate, and I loved reading that Allison likes chocolate as well. And that's not something that you would necessarily read in the news usually. But hey, Allison took liking chocolate to a whole new level where she was actually during her time at MIT, she was part of a chocolate science lab. And that's where she discussed all things about states of chocolate and transitions and any political implications of chocolate. So that was really awesome to hear. And then when it comes to Burke, he shared that he has logged in the past 2 weeks, correct me if I'm wrong, Burke, but in the past 2 weeks, he has logged over 53 hours in Overwatch. And he allegedly skipped on helping his sons on the chemistry homework. Now, Burke, we're going to have to explain this to your kids later when they're adults and they're going to see this stream.
Yeah, it's not good. Send help.
But hey, I'm so excited about the topic that the two of you are going to chat about. Christian has already alluded to the fact that you are going to spend some time talking about Hasura GraphQL and Azure functions and how they work together. So everyone on the stream, join the conversation, give them a warm round of applause in the chat. Yeah, over to you, Burke and Allison.
Hey, thank you, Simona. Wow, this is a prime programming slot here right after the keynote. Exciting stuff. Hey, everybody, I'm Burke, and I'm here with Allison. Allison? No, wait, Allison from Hasura, and we're going to talk about GraphQL and serverless. Hey, Allison, welcome.
Hey, it is great to be here. Thank you again for inviting me.
Awesome. Absolutely. So for the uninitiated or those who, like me, are sort of new to the whole concept of GraphQL, what exactly is GraphQL? Maybe we just start there.
Yeah. So GraphQL is a query language for APIs. You can think of it as another API framework or spec similar to REST or SOAP. It solves several of the biggest challenges for developers building modern data-driven applications, working with highly interconnected data, getting only the data you need in the shape you need it. And it's a much better developer experience with some amazing developer tools.
Yeah, I find GraphQL fascinating from what I understand of it because it really does empower the front-end developers with the ability to define what they need from the API instead of having to write a new service or having someone who does the backend or writes web services to add a field to a response. You as the developer can just sort of query the database directly from the front end, even though you're not doing that. But GraphQL gives you the ability to do that, and that's super powerful for front-end devs.
Yes, crazy. Absolutely. And it takes so much of the grunt work off of the backend devs. It's self-documenting, it's strongly typed, and there are several awesome mature clients to work with at this point. We've got Apollo client, we've got Urkel, and we've got several others.
So there's a lot to love about GraphQL. What exactly, did Hasura invent GraphQL, or what role is Hasura playing here when it comes to, what does Hasura do exactly?
Yeah. So the Hasura GraphQL engine provides a complete GraphQL infrastructure. It unifies all of your company's data sources into a single GraphQL API. The core Hasura GraphQL engine is open source. It's a containerized application that you can deploy anywhere. We also offer additional pro features on Hasura Cloud and Hasura Enterprise. We didn't invent GraphQL, but we did rethink how, at a fundamental level, kind of how it's carried out, which led to some really extreme performance, speed, and reliability gains.
So if I understand what you just said correctly, does that mean that does that mean that Hasura sits in front of your database and just sort of like exposes the date? Like it just magically creates a GraphQL API in front of your database? Is that right?
Automagical. So to start, you just give Hasura your Postgres connection string, and you have a highly performant CRUD operation complete set available instantly. There's also a permissions engine for cell-level security and data federation features for bringing in all of your other data sources as well.
I mean, that in and of itself is definitely worth checking out. But we are at a serverless event today. So what's all of this got to do with serverless?
Hasura is very extensible. It's meant to be a one-stop data shop for your application. You can add custom resolvers, which Hasura calls actions, to bring in your additional data sources, or apply business logic or data transformations or any other extra functionality that you can need. You can also implement your own event triggers, as mentioned in the previous session, either on database operations or on a schedule. And all of this extension, this customization, all this extra functionality is easily done with serverless functions. And Azure functions are particularly great for that. If you want to take a look.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, actions, resolvers, triggers, business logic, this stuff is all kind of hard to grasp without sort of seeing it work, seeing it in action. So yeah, let's take a look at Hasura.
Right. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Hey, sweet. All right, so this is how we have implemented a particular action. This is get recommendations. So let's say that you have an ML recommendations engine and you want to send it the product IDs in the current customer cart, and you want to get back the product IDs of a bunch of recommendations from the engine. So here you can see, if you've ever written a resolver before, this looks pretty familiar. You're basically declaring your input type to the handler, and you're declaring what the Hasura should expect back. Here is my serverless function, actually with all of that implemented. And just to make this easier, by the way, Hasura already has built in a lot of code gen, taking those types that you've declared and giving you basically kind of your starter kit for how that should work. In particular,
nice, yeah.
Yeah. So
I recognize
JavaScript,
the Azure Functions code.
And yeah, any language, it's completely agnostic. You can write in whatever you're comfortable with. All it needs is the handler and those type definitions, and you're good to go. So we want to take a look at the.
So just real quick, just to help me clarify, Allison, on your actions there, you were defining. Can you go back there for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
Just make sure I understand this. So you have this endpoint called get recommendations,
mm-hmm.
and so this is the type up top, this order product IDs, but then you're returning this sort of like set of recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are you saying that this is not coming? These recommendations are not coming out of the database? They're not just in the database?
So no, this is actually reaching out to a third-party API. So if we want to take a look at the actual resolver.
I gotcha. So in this case, what's happening is a query is coming in, but the data is not in the database. We actually have to
mm-hmm.
call out to something else, which is going to calculate and then return the data back. I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So this could be REST. This could be SOAP. This could be any other outside or a fellow team. Any logic that you want, you can put into here. We have a fake ML thing for right now, and then it just returns those recommendations as an array. So if you want to just like run it, then mocking your recommendation engine, and it's so easy to use. This get recommendations, it's just like any other query to your. It's already built in to your CRUD, like it's just right there. There's no special.
Yeah, so
declarations or anything.
Yeah, you've got like what looks like you're basically the tables in the database on the side there, and Hasura's sort of magically turned those into a GraphQL API. But this is sort of the crux of this is the whole problem with querying databases is that it's never, if only it was as easy as just getting the data out of the database. It's never that easy. It usually involves, linking data and pulling from other sources. And in this demo, what you're doing is basically what Amazon does, which is gives you, based on what you just did, they call out to some service which returns a list of recommended products. But you're just creating that. You're doing that with a serverless function, but then just adding it to the GraphQL API right in here. Yeah, yes. That makes sense.
And you can also add, so that was a query. You can also do mutations. So custom business logic or procedures before sending a response or before changing the database. So let's say that you're processing a checkout. There we go. So in this function, it's processing the checkout with the order ID, doing everything in terms of a custom business logic function, a serverless function, and then it's just returning the confirmation ID at the end. So you can basically, on both ends, you can enhance the response, so add in additional data, or you can make sure to check or extend or transform data before it hits the database.
I gotcha. And then the serverless part is that's what's actually doing the business logic. Instead of having to stand up some other service, you just call it to a serverless function, it returns the data, and then that's exposed by Hasura via GraphQL.
Yes.
Very nice. And I guess you can intercept what you were showing at the end, that you can intercept stuff coming in and going out and do whatever you need to do with it before it actually gets processed.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, okay, so Hasura makes GraphQL easy. It's extendable with serverless, and it's fully compatible with Azure too. I know because I've seen it in the Azure Marketplace. So, I mean, if people want to get started with Hasura, what do they need? Do they need an Azure account? Do they need a Hasura account? Like, how does this work if people want to try this out with their database?
We have several options. So you can either it's an open source project, so if you want to take a look at the Hasura GraphQL Engine repo, take a look, containerized application. You can also have us host things for you. So we offer Hasura Cloud, or we of course have Hasura Enterprise for self-hosted.
And I know that you were mentioning something earlier about authentication, and Chris from the Chris and Chris show before this mentioned this as well, that oftentimes there has to be some sort of authentication. Like APIs are great, but you can't just have a wide open API on the web. That's not going to work. And so I know that y'all have done some work here recently with Azure Active Directory in terms of authentication. What's the story there?
So Burke, since you work at Microsoft, you might be happy to know that we do also officially support Azure Active Directory and Active Directory B2C as authentications. So that's awesome. And better, we just announced upcoming support for both MySQL and SQL Server. So all of the databases are now getting the love.
Very nice. So before it was just Postgres, but now we've got support for SQL Server and MySQL. Of course, I'm partial to SQL Server. I learned on databases on SQL Server. True story, SQL Server has implicit transactions. And so I once dropped everyone from the ERP database as a joke. And then I was going to roll back the transaction, but you can't do that in SQL Server. So that's just for the audience there. And also, fun fact, Allison, I learned that MySQL is still the most used, I believe, relational database in the world, according to Stack Overflow. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. That many people using MySQL. The old dolphin. Well, I mean, it looks to me, Hasura looks extremely fascinating to me, especially if the thought of coding up a bunch of GraphQL APIs isn't something that maybe you necessarily want to do. Because it seems like that could be a lot of work, especially if you already have people usually have already made APIs and they just want GraphQL as well. And so it seems like this is a really quick way to get from here to there.
It's great, especially for enterprise digital transformations, because you can start with that digital transformation. You can start new architectures. You can bring in new performance enhancements, but you don't have to lose all of that existing work. You can bring in also your legacy REST APIs, your legacy SOAP endpoints. You don't have to lose that. You can do major transformations, but incrementally.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, I work as a developer advocate, and so part of what we do is and you know this, you do the same sort of work over at Hasura, but a lot of what we do is we show people these very beautiful, sparkly pieces of technology with very simple databases, and they're greenfield, right? It's like we started from scratch and we stood up an API, but in the real world, which I spent 10 years working in the enterprise, a lot of times what we had was we had a SQL server and we had an Oracle server and we had, dozens of SQL servers that are all linked together, and there's stored procedures everywhere, and there's technical debt that's been inherited from years and years and years of people, passing through and working there. And I know that when I talk to people at Microsoft conferences, like they'll come to Ignite and they'll say, this stuff is so amazing, but I'm kind of depressed because I'm never going to get to use it. I'm never going to get to use it where I work. And so Hasura seems like this way to be able to actually use GraphQL when you are in a disparate enterprise environment like that.
Yes, we've put a huge focus on data federation, making sure that teams can work together cleanly without, lots of extra dependencies or coordination requirements. We try and make it as simple and straightforwarded and actually kind of a microservices-ish architecture design as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's fascinating. So one of the things that someone, Olympus Tech here, was asking, what is the point of GraphQL? So I was hoping that maybe we answered that at the start, but maybe we didn't do a terribly great job of that. It's oftentimes hard to understand exactly what the benefit of GraphQL is until you see it actually work. But I guess I would answer that by saying that it puts the power of querying the database in the hands of the front-end developer instead of you having to create or modify services in order to return that data. Yes.
In terms of just, engineering and the developer experience, it's hands down a lot of improvement. So GraphQL actually came out of Facebook. It was open sourced in 2015. It's now overseen by an independent GraphQL organization. But it was kind of prompted by some really interesting challenges that Facebook was having with emerging markets. So you have a lot of times maybe older devices and limited bandwidth. So these things like over or under fetching, how do you really just get the right data in the right shape with minimal front end reprocessing and everything like that? How do you really just streamline this so that you can still get a really good user experience no matter what the limitations kind of maybe might be? And so, of course, when you think about doing that with REST, just trying to think of all of the engineering and the extra requirements that would be there to support that is mind-boggling. But with GraphQL, that's just a lot of grunt work removed and a lot more cleaner user experience and cleaner applications being able to be built.
Yeah, I like that whole overfetching. I totally forgotten about that, where, for instance, all you need is the customer name, but the only endpoint you have returns everything we know about a customer, so 80 fields. And if you're in a place where bandwidth is limited, you're not just eating up people's bandwidth for data that you're never going to use. And what GraphQL does is it allows the front-end developer to say, hey, just give me the name, right? Yeah. I'll tell you what of the data set I want.
Yeah, and all of that stitching together on the front end, as a front end, taking a few different chunks of data and then having to knit them into what you actually wanted. These days, if someone gives me a FizzBuzz question or something like that as a question, I'm just like, why would I ever do that anymore? I'm getting the data that I want in the shape that I want it. I'm not FizzBuzzing anymore. That's the past. We can leave that alone and never talk about it again.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Hasura makes your GraphQL easy. I think we had a comment in here from Rob Brennan who described it really well. He said, Hasura helps get the more tedious resolver code out of the way, which I think is a phenomenal thing. Any tediousness that can be removed from the lives of developers is sign me up for that. So if GraphQL is your thing, you want to check out Hasura. And even if it's not, you probably might want to check out GraphQL anyway. You can sign up for Hasura Cloud and poke around, and it integrates now with Azure Functions, so you can use serverless to tie into all of your business logic. Allison, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, Simona, back to you.
Thank you so much, Burke. That was so awesome. I loved all of the comments in YouTube. There was tons of reactions to Hasura and kind of people noting how awesome it is. There were some questions in regards to serverless and GraphQL and how do you combine them, things like subscriptions and things around limitations. So I would encourage all of you to go scan the office hours Dev2 article here. That's the QR code at the right-hand side of the screen. So then you can go into the Dev2 article, read a bit about what Burke wrote there, and then Allison and Burke would be delighted to answer some of your questions there, get some of your insights, and of course continue the chat on YouTube as well. But this was so great. I learned tons, and I love how well integrated both Hasura and Azure Functions are at the moment. So thank you so much, Burke and Allison, for the wonderful chat, and I hope to see you in just a bit in the office hours.
Thank you, Simona. See you on Dev2, everybody.
Thanks so much.
And for those of you that are still looking for resources and wanting to learn more about either Hasura or GraphQL or even Azure, in the slide that I shared earlier, there's a few resources there. So you're going to see on the first QR code there a link to the Hasura docs. And then there's also a link to Christian's awesome workshop that allows you or teaches you how to build GraphQL applications using Azure Functions, and it allows you to schedule tweets from an application that you're gonna build. And then there's also 2 other QR codes there that you're gonna find throughout all of these sessions. Those are resources that help you get started with Azure Functions, and links to a few learning paths that basically enable you to write serverless code within a sandbox. So you don't need to have an Azure account, you don't need to have, you only need to have a Microsoft account, and then you'll be able to run code in the cloud within the sandbox that's provided by Microsoft Learn. I highly encourage all of you to try it out and let us know your feedback as well. Let us know if you've tried it before, or if you enjoyed it, or if you had any issues with that.